Good evening, and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings you the Constitution, the events of the day, and the law to you each month. Tonight, myself, James Barrett, and Mark Malachowski will be discussing three subjects that are currently in the news. Mark, what do we have tonight?
Well, first we're going to start with the owl that's accused of murder, and then we're going to move on to the 2020 election deniers have gotten a little bit of trouble. One of these guys is looking at a RICO charge, and he's looking at doing 33 years in prison for denying the 2020 election. So just for the record, the 2020 election was the most free, fair, best election there ever was on the whole planet.
No fraud in that election.
No fraud in that election, okay. Anyway, so number three, you've got Snowden and the third-party doctrine. And anyway, well, that's what we got. That's number three.
So why don't we start with the first one? We're talking about the owl that's responsible for a murder, aren't we?
Yeah, and so this is kind of an interesting case because it seems like it's a little far-fetched, and it really didn't come up in trial to near the end. But what the neighbor was actually some kind of forensic analysis guy, and he was looking at this and said, well, where did these tear mark comes from on Kathleen Peterson's head?
Okay, well, wait a minute. Let's talk about that for a minute, because the trial court was having problems with the evidence from the case because it had been mishandled by the sheriffs, and they were trying to determine what could have caused these injuries to the decedent. But upon review, as you stated, the neighbor, who was a forensic pathologist of some sort, retired, he said these marks are not from a weapon. He believed they were from an owl, a barred owl. So how did he find that, Mark?
Well, let's back up and just kind of, start at the beginning of what they were drinking by the pool, and both of them were taking pills. So Kathleen Peterson and her husband were drinking and had some pills in their
So they're
system.
intoxicated.
So they're mixing, and so that can have synergistic effects that you don't plan for, so a lot of people do that because it's fun, but it could really affect
Wasn't the DA saying they were arguing and that gave the motive for why he would have killed his wife?
I don't know how they would substantiate those arguments, because I think they were alone. So it wasn't like they were at a party.
And there was no witnesses.
No one saw him saying, I'm going to get you or something like that. Maybe earlier there had been something, or in another place. But I think they were just at the pool. They'd had some drinks. They'd taken a couple pills, and what was interesting is that she, there was blood outside the stairs, right, before she went in the house, or just entering the house. And then, so the theory is that she went into the house, and probably to escape this owl if it had teared at her skull, and as she was walking up the stairs, she got up the stairs, and then she got woozy, fell backwards, and then rolled on down.
Broke her neck or whatever.
Well, they're saying she bled to death, but that's possible, but it's always kind of hard to tell. Generally, a broken neck would be a lot more fatal, a lot quicker. Bleeding to death could take like a half hour.
Yeah, it could take, and that's where you wonder where the husband was all during that time when the wife's not responding.
Yeah, well, he might have been sitting by the pool.
So the theory was that the barred owls in this area all weigh like 2 to 3 pounds. So they're big owls.
Right.
And because it's a bird of prey, it has they go to a high acceleration to come down to grab mice and squirrels and all of that. So the question was, why would the barred owl come after her? But because of the style of her hair, there's a theory that while she was entering the house, the owl came down to scoop up something for a nest or something. And when he grabbed the top of her head, he dug in like he was trying to pick up debris that you would build a nest with. And it dug into her scalp and ripped her scalp. And what's interesting was in her hand, which the forensic people originally didn't even pay any attention to, were like pine things, like you would get out of an upper level of a tree. So it was like she was trying to fight the owl, and what happened was she got it in her hands, but because of there was like talon marks in her head. So it wasn't like magically she was bleeding from her skull. The owl obviously had come down, and with the impact, hit her in the head, dug in trying to get some debris from her hair, but instead hit her that hard.
Well, that's a bad hair date for
That
sure.
is a bad
hair date, and I would say that that's kind of an unusual way to go. But I think, maybe the shock of having something hit you and
that
be
fast,
bleeding.
that hard.
And one thing, that I always, when I was in college in the summers, I was going to be a physics tutor. Well, that money fell through, so I ended up going commercial fishing. And the guys who kind of were my mentors for that were ex-Navy SEALs. And,
Right.
and they would tend to get into altercations here and there. And they said, it doesn't matter how big a guy is, you don't really have to hurt him. If you pop in the nose, and as soon as your opponent sees his own blood, he loses a lot of his
energy.
Well, he loses his morale. It's
Right.
demoralizing. So
Right.
doesn't really have to injure somebody, but when they see their own blood. And so I think, people don't understand that, how, being drunk and having some pills and then putting your hand on your head and taking your hand away,
got blood.
having blood, that would be something that could make somebody swoon. So I think it's kind of believable that she swooned as a result of the attack.
On the way up the stairs.
And you're saying there's an impact, but I would say just the fact that there's blood tends to make people feel
Woozy.
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 So I think that's a possibility. And also with the pills, who knows, what exactly the synergistic effects are, because, you have different drugs and, doctors prescribe a lot of drugs. I mean, you've got everything's brought to you by Pfizer.
Right.
And so people take a lot of pills now. And I think that one doctor that's prescribing you something, you might have another doctor prescribing you something. They might not talk to each other.
Well, on
so you
top
don't
of
know.
that, you're going to have a bad synergy between the medication
right.
and you throw in alcohol and the fact that she was potentially had the impact and the blood. All these things roll into a thing when she's trying to go up the stairs, her falling back and then bleeding to death. She probably didn't have the wherewithal to pay attention to what was really going on.
Well, just something, if you're on the pills and drinking, maybe you're not using the handrail and, so it seems like it's possible. Now, the other theory would be that there would be, obviously, the husband would have done the attack. They didn't see any sign of anybody else around. But what did he use to make those kind of cut marks?
Well, because they are lacerations and ripped off part of her skull area.
Right.
It was like
Because I'm thinking there are some
lacerations.
garden tools that kind of have some stuff like that, but I think they maybe eliminated that wasn't a garden tool.
Yeah, there was no indication of any
Yeah.
garden tools that would have caused this. And what's interesting is when the forensic guy compared the talons of this size owl that nests in this area, they found that it was about the same depth and stroke that took a part of her skull piece off.
Wow.
So anyway, listen, we'll come back to the owl,
Right.
who is the source of a murder, and during our next, when we see what the court does with
The
that.
owl defense. Okay,
And so what's our second story
Well, the next
tonight?
one's kind of interesting. Now, a lot of people have some questions about the 2020 election. And because they're saying, well, it looks like...
Questions?
Well, there was more votes than there were registered voters, and there was
in multiple states.
And there was the drop boxes, when it seemed like a lot of people were
Oh,
like...
you mean the stuff boxes?
Yeah, they were dropping off a lot. They were helping their friends.
Oh, they just had to drop off
And
those
then,
ballots.
and then there was one place where they were like, as soon as they kicked everybody out about 2 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
And then
the suitcases
yeah,
came
and then
out.
all these boxes came
These
out
extra
from under.
ballots.
And then it was like, and they kicked out some observers, and they put up cardboard things, and
So nobody could see.
and so the thing about it is, well, the thing is, you don't want to confuse people by letting them see what's going on.
You mean the truth?
And then they also had, what's interesting is the theory that the electronic voting machines, okay, the guy who came up with this.
Dominion.
Dominion, but the guy who originally came up with this theory was a computer guy. And the ATM machines, they, like when you get your paycheck, you got 99942 and it goes down to, basis points or hundredth of a basis point, right?
Right.
But what happens when you have a rounding error? I mean, a rounding issue, right? Who gets this? Does the bank get that, or does the customer get
Well,
that?
the banks always get it.
So no. What they did, okay, we'll do a random number thing, okay, and if it's 6th, whatever, the bank gets it, or the customer gets it. If it's 5, the bank gets it. But what happens? I mean, 4 gets it. But what happens to a 5, right? And so what they did is
It's a mystery.
No, they do a random number generator,
Yeah.
and sometimes one side gets it. So basically, they flip a coin with the computer, and sometimes one gets it, once the other. But there was a group of guys who said, well, why don't we just take that 5 and put it in a separate account? Nobody's really going to know. And so they were, they were collecting a lot of money. And after a couple of years, they had plenty of money, tens of millions or 30, 40, 50 million. They said, well, we don't want to get in trouble, so maybe we should stop doing it. So that was their mistake. They stopped doing it. And then the accountants were like, where's all this money coming from, right? How come the bank's making more money? The customers didn't mind. They didn't really question it.
They didn't know any better.
But the banks were like, wait a minute, how come we're making another 3, whatever percent, like a, 10,
is a percent.
Well, it was basis points, really. How come we're making another 2 basis points, on these accounts?
Yeah.
And so they got busted for that. And they put that guy in prison, and then he was looking at, a long time in prison. But then somebody came and said, of one particular party, and said, why don't you be they gave him amnesty, why don't you be in charge of the voting machines?
Oh.
So now it's kind of like there's always this little leaner thing, and you can put the random generator in there or not, or you can do what you want. And you say, well, how do you do that? Do you program it in the machine? Yeah, you can do it that way. Can you put a, what do they call a USB in?
Yeah, USB.
In a few seconds and do it that way?
Right.
Can you do it remotely? Yeah, you can do it. So there's several different ways you can do it. And if you watch some of the things at night, you can see that there were glitches where they went choop, 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 choop. And so some people are going, there's about 3 or 4 real plausible theories of how they did this, and it looks like they did them all. But
and by the way, so in Georgia, where one of the places where they seem to have some evidence of this, there is the question of why somebody would challenge the election. And so under Georgia, which has a really unique RICO part of interpretation of RICO, what it says is if you say something, even if it turns out to be true, and a group of you say it, oh, that's a RICO. When in fact, RICO is a racketeering, it's aimed at organized crime, it has nothing to do with your First Amendment right to discuss whether or not an election was fair or not. But in Georgia, they don't interpret it that way.
Well, I'm just saying RICO is an interesting, it's a racketeering statute. And it's just saying that you're organized crime, right?
And wait a minute, what does that mean?
Well, organized crimes is probably somebody you disagree with. And, they came up with something different, and they came up with a different theory. So now if it's one of your guys, it's called policy making. Yeah, policy making. But anyway, so a RICO is pretty serious because it is, generally you use a RICO if you were paying hitmen to murder people. That was how they got RICO in the first place. And then it became pretty much almost anything, like any law, right? They take it and they exploit it until it covers everything.
To cover anything. Next thing you know, if you're collecting pumpkins on Halloween and you're a team of people cleaning them up, that could be a RICO.
Not to say that we would do such a thing.
Never.
Okay, so anyway, so here's the thing. Okay, Harrison Floyd is one of the guys, and he said, well, the Georgia election, at least in this one county, was rigged. And they're saying, well, he didn't believe that when he said it. So even if it turns out that this election was rigged, he believed it wasn't, and then he got another person or two, because a conspiracy, really all a conspiracy is 2 people agreeing to do something, right? And so a conspiracy is, okay, this is the difference between a conspiracy and not
that's the contest in the election.
Okay, so, but the thing is, let's say you go, let's go and, let's go, I really like to rob the Bank of America, right? And your buddy goes, yeah, I'd like to rob that bank too. It's probably a lot of money. That's not conspiracy. But if you go, let's go see what time the guard opens the door at the Bank of America, and then you go and see that, and case the joint, now you've got a conspiracy because it's an impetus to do something in furtherance of the crime.
Furtherance of the crime.
And so the crime here is to question whether the 2020 election was the fairest and freest election that the world's ever seen. And if you question that...
Or it's not.
No, but I'm just saying to question that is the crime. So they basically consider that robbing a bank. And so anybody who says that this was a rigged election, if they do some
it's
kind of...
part of the conspiracy.
Well, no, but they'd have to do an impotence to change it. So if you file a lawsuit, you talk to a newspaper and you go, well, this was rigged because of A, B, C, and D, and somebody else goes, yeah, well, I see that too. I believe it's rigged as A, B, D, and C, and you publicly say that. Now you've committed a conspiracy. So, and it's kind of an interesting election.
Okay, wait a minute.
Okay, so
first of all, you're correct on that description. Unfortunately, what they're being charged with has never really been charged before. And once again, it's a very unique charge that they brought out of the ancient times back in the 1700s, which they didn't call it RICO, but they called it contesting, what is the normal state of what just happened. Say if George Washington was elected, and they said, no, he didn't win the election. It's almost that ancient of a theory in Georgia, going back. Yeah. Okay, and here's it is. It's never been charged.
So anyway, here's the point. Okay.
And why is it? Why was it charged?
Well, I think it's because the 2020 election was special.
It was a special.
It was a special election.
By the way, very special.
And nobody really knows who counted the votes. And they weren't counted in the United States, and they weren't counted by U.S. citizens, right? Nobody knows who counted these votes. So,
and no one will admit it. And you know what's interesting? This gentleman. Hang on. Let's talk about this gentleman. He tried to subpoena the voter registration people in Georgia. Yeah, so that was his part of the conspiracy.
He subpoenaed the office of the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and the Fulton County Clerk of Courts and the Fulton County Board of Elections. So for him to subpoena somebody, that's furthering this conspiracy when he knew it wasn't true.
The conspiracy.
And so what's interesting about it is that, and I think the truism is pretty much true, is that it doesn't really matter who you vote for, who counts the votes. And we don't know who counts the votes here. But obviously the people who count the votes also do the prosecution.
Yeah, well, the last thing I'm going to throw in on this is no industrialized country in the world votes by mail. And the majority of them, even Iran, votes only one vote, one person. So we're going to have to come back and see how this plays out, because I'm going to tell you right now, with the 19 co-conspirators, alleged co-conspirators, there's going to find, with all this digging, with all this evidence, they're going to find irregularities, and it's going to come down to freedom of speech.
Well, but actually the prosecution argues that even if it's proven that Trump won, right?
Yeah.
And that this guy was, that they're right, that it was rigged, he's still guilty.
Okay, well, let's hold that thought. Let's move on to our third topic. What do we have?
Well, this is Snowden and the third party.
Wait a minute, are we talking Snowden? Edwin Snowden, guy that's in Russia, because he took all the materials from the database and proved that, oh, by the way, there is a swamp?
No, what happened is Snowden was working for the CIA, and he got more and more promotions, and so he got to see more and more stuff. And he discovered that the government, well, it's not really the government, because it's actually three spy agencies. There's they call them something, but it's like England, the United States, and Australia, or whatever, but they're like MI6, CIA, and I'm sure there's some censored ones that you're not allowed to mention. And they all work together. And they can see everything, right? And what he found is that, okay, let's say you go to Amazon. Well, Amazon knows your buying habits, right? And let's say you go to Facebook. Well, Facebook knows what you think, right? Or who your family is, okay? And then you go somewhere else and you go to your bank, right? And your bank knows all about your transactions, right? But you have some amount of privacy because they just know that slice of your life. Mm-hmm. But when the government starts looking at it, they get all that information.
Put it into one little pile.
Yeah, and so they also have like your GPS, right? And so they know everywhere you go if you've got a phone, right?
Yeah.
They know everything you say.
Yep.
Not only do they know everything you say on this phone, because they can read it whether it's turned off or not, unless you have it in a special case, they know everything that anyone around you said to their phone or ever put it in their phone or did email or phone calls and everything. So that all goes into a database, and they can see all that. And so when they had one of these guys was testifying, I forget, one of these CIA guys, he goes, oh no, we don't spy on Americans. You know, someone goes, well, no, we spy on Americans.
We spy on all Americans.
No, as a matter of fact, that's all we spy on. We don't really spy on the Russians or the Africans. We just spy on Americans. So he said this, and so he took that information and he went to Hong Kong. And at that time, Hong Kong was relatively free of what you could do with the internet. And he met with some Australian journalists, and he said, okay, well, what we'll do, he reviewed all the cases of all the other snitches, right? And they had already gone through the thing, and they've gone through that, and they all got in prison for life, right? And so he said, well, I don't want to do what, I think I'm doing the right thing, but if I do these things, I'll go to prison forever. So I got to leave the country, I've got to get foreign journalists, and I got to do it in Hong Kong where we can transmit stuff. And what they did is they took a package and said, this is what we're going to divulge to the world, to the public. Let us know if this would endanger any spies that work for these, whatever you call it.
Reveal spies, and they may be exposed.
Would this cause any problems?
Right.
And so he goes, well, of course they said, you can't reveal anything, we're going to get you anyway. And so he was flying around, and he wanted to go to Ecuador, right? But he was in Hong Kong, but he couldn't fly west. I mean, he couldn't fly east, because if he fly east, he'd have to cross American territory somewhere.
And then somebody would have jurisdiction.
It would be like Trump flying across some state, he gets indicted,
Yeah.
So he would be captured if he went that way. So the only way he could go from Hong Kong to Ecuador was by going through Russia and landing in Russia. So he landed in Russia. They took his passport as soon as they revealed we're gonna snitch on this stuff, and so he's stuck in Russia. So that's where he ended up. So
and he's still there, isn't he?
He's still there. So anyway, in the 1970s, the court invented the doctrine known as the third-party doctrine, and so
Wait a minute. Before you jump there, the third-party doctrine, it opens up the Fourth Amendment.
There's no more Fourth. Forget about
the Fourth Amendment's all gone.
Well,
so we all thought we had protections under the Fourth
but
Amendment.
I mean, but
wait a minute, Mark, don't we?
No,
don't we have protections?
Especially after 9/11, which is like, I'm not going to go into that because that's all censored. But we have to be very careful because they'll censor the show.
Yeah, I know.
So we can't talk about that one.
But anyway, disappear in the parking lot.
But we won't be able to show it. Anyway, we're not going to say who or did what on that. But basically, that was the end of your Fourth Amendment, right?
Yeah. So what? Okay,
so I'm just saying. But this is even extends past the Fourth Amendment. This is even
this eviscerates the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah. Well, anyway. So in 1970s, they had Jimmy Hoffa, and he was blabbing to a snitch or stool pigeon, whatever you want to call him, and basically. Snowden was a snitch. He's a snitch. He's an informant. He's a stool pigeon. And so Hoffa was blabbing to a government stool pigeon, and the court found that it's not a search if you voluntarily make an incriminating statement to someone who then relays it to the government. So if you told the government, you'd have to have a Fifth Amendment warning or a Miranda. But if you just tell it to somebody and then someone goes and tells the government, then it's okay.
Yeah. Well, see, the Fourth Amendment says you're supposed to be protected in your papers, your home, and all this, right?
Search and seizure.
So what this does, this third-party doctrine says, if I go, hey, Mark, by the way, I did this, and Mark goes, by the way, Mr. Barrett did this.
Yeah, right.
And that means I've already waived all my rights without even knowing it, and I'm sitting there maybe having a beer with you, and we're joking about what we did last weekend.
No joking.
The next thing, there is no joking.
No joking.
So now that's like I'm confessing to you.
Well, actually, there was even a case where someone shrugged. And they shrugged, and they go, well, did you murder this guy? They shrugged. They took that as a confession.
They took that as
that guy went down from murder
and
one.
by the way, that means you can convict on that confession.
Yeah.
Because it's like in court. Did you shrug your shoulders?
I want to talk to my attorney. That's all you can say. Okay,
all I can do is shrug my shoulders?
So anyway, Hoffa blabbed to this, and SCOTUS found it was not a search when you voluntarily make incriminating statements and then relates it to the government. So if you make it to a private citizen, you've got no protection. Now let's look at this. That's under the reasonable expectation of privacy test. There's no Fourth Amendment protection for all the information voluntarily turns over to third parties. Well, let's talk about our third parties. Okay, third parties are a bank. Our bank's not supposed to tell everybody what we do, but now they can tell, and they don't. The other thing is the government doesn't need a warrant anymore. They can just go to the bank and say, give us everything, give us all James records for you ever got. And they can go to Amazon and say, give us all the records. They can go to Facebook, give us all the records. They'll go to Google and say, give us all the records. No warrant. So everything that you say.
Because you're talking.
Well, not only that,
interacting.
We're talking right now, and everything we're saying can be accessed without a warrant.
You want to speak a little louder, Mark?
Yeah, because everything we say can be accessed with a warrant. And also, there's these, and also you have to remember, it's not just American spy agencies. There's spy agencies that can tap into the central servers
database
in Utah, and they have it, right? So it's not just, and then I'm sure there's other spy agents spying on that. So basically, everything you say and do has several spy agencies working on it. And so and then, so when you call someone, you give the phone company the number. So now they can look at all your numbers and everything you say. Look at a website.
They can look at every number, every message, every text.
If you look at a website, you have to send the URL to your internet provider. So now the government can get all that.
Yeah.
So the bank. So basically, the third-party doctrine says that regardless of if all these companies agree to keep our information secret, government agents can demand access to it without seeing a judge or a warrant. Now, I was at one of my MCLEs or it was some kind of symposium, and the lawyer from Google was there, and he said, well, Google can take all your information, and we can sell it to, even if you're opposing counsel, right? And I said, excuse me, I pay for, I do a professional Google. I don't use anything for free with Google. That should all be protected under work privilege and attorney-client privilege and confidentiality and all this. She says, no. He says, when your secretary opens a piece of mail, she knows what's in there and she can tell anyone what she wants. I said, no, my secretary has the same duty of confidentiality as I do. So you guys have a duty of confidentiality.
But see, you're revealing to your secretary, which means if anything she does, she's revealing to whoever she feels
No,
like.
but that's not true. She has a duty of confidentiality.
She has a duty, but
no,
where
but
does
I'm just
that
saying,
duty start? Where does it end?
Well, the point of the matter is, Google says, I'm your secretary. I open all your mail, and I put all your mail in, and I have no duty of confidentiality. And I said, well, where did that theory comes in? You know what his answer was?
No.
We're Google. And all the other lawyers like, Mark, let's not get us in trouble with Google.
Oh, it's Google. Google, hail, Google, hail, Google.
So the answer is on the whole 30-part document is like, they're Google.
Oh, by the way.
And like, so.
No, but the whole answer is.
So you used to have the Fourth Amendment. Now you got Google.
There is no Fourth Amendment.
Well,
now,
there used to be.
third-party doctrine means what they've applied. It's not just me telling you something. It's everything you do electronically, everything you do Facebook, anything, anywhere. And guess what?
No, but I mean, these things also, like if somebody's across the room, they also can pick up everything they do, and then they'll pick up everything you do. So they can go and look at anyone all the time, anywhere.
Okay,
and they do.
I got to tell you, Mark, what we're going to do
So that's what
here,
Snowden did.
We got to watch where this third-party doctrine expands some more. But tonight, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us. We've had a pretty exciting little conversation. You better watch out who you're talking to and make sure that you understand the third-party doctrine.
Yeah, third-party doctrine's everywhere. Yeah. They're our friends.
They're our friends. Everything you say is good to go. It's good. Oh, by the way, we can trust them.
Of course.
Yeah, well, what am I supposed to say here?
Yeah.